Okay, welcome to the makeup class for advanced humanitarian social work. I explained to the class rep why we are having a makeup. So we don't want to lose any time. We want to connect quickly and then move forward so that we can be progressive. So we're going to continue with the normal timetable shortly. But you can use this for the makeup of the previous class for advanced humanitarian social work. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome. So today we're going to look at the differences between social work and humanitarian social work. Let me just check. Yes, my screen is showing. I believe it's also should be showing from your end. Um, yeah. Now, this is basic information for at this level, but it is good for us to recap into it so that we gel, as this is part of the introductory parts of the course. So, social work is very broad. It's a broad profession. They say social workers are jacks of all trades, and we're dedicated to improving the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Those are our traditional clients. But of course, we have clients that we have onboarded, like the environment and other aspects. And we do this through advocacy, through empowerment, through support services, and through so many methods and means and interventions. So that is social work eh, broadly, okay? A jack of all trades, almost. Then we have humanitarian social work, which is a specialization within social work. They say an apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So the apple is an aspect of the tree, the traits of the tree that the apple must have or has, like the seed within it that will form another apple. So, being a specialization of social work, humanitarian social work specializes or focuses on crisis situations such as natural disasters, conflicts, um, forced displacement, um, where there's disruption in normal life, okay, that affects basically any aspect of any psychosocial or economic or environmental aspect of our clientele, our traditional clientele, who are individuals, groups, and communities. For example, in our country or in Kenya, social workers are involved in child protection services through the Department of Children's Services. So generally, social workers will be providing services to children, not just through the Department of Children's Services, but through NGOs, CBOs, and other organizations. Now, humanitarian social workers will be working in specific humanitarian organizations or situations. Like, for example, in Kenya, we have the Dadaab refugee camp. And in this space, they'll be providing aid to displaced population. So, in terms of children, you'd find children's NGOs in Dadaab, at the Dadaab refugee camp, who are providing education, healthcare, and other services specifically to children who have been affected by a humanitarian crisis. Okay, so there's children in general who we cater for as social workers, because, like in social workers are referred to as the legal custodians of children. Social workers are the ones who, for example, remove children from places of abuse and take them to places of safety, and they are legally empowered to do that. So that is work with children in general. But then the specific work with children who have been affected by humanitarian crisis, and that now would happen like or maybe a social worker working with the UNHCR within the refugee camp and so many other organizations that would be working in the humanitarian setup. Okay. The key differences between social work and humanitarian social work, we're just going to run through this because this is actually knowledge that you already have. So, in terms of definition, they are different. We've already said that. So, the humanitarian social work is just a specialized um, branch, okay, of social work, okay. In terms of the scope, the extent to which we would serve, traditional social work or social work itself is so broad. It would include child welfare, mental health, community development, and various social justice issues. Okay, but humanitarian social work would be more focused in terms of scope. In terms of scope, humanitarian social work would be more focused. Okay, so we'll just highlight that focus on providing emergency relief, protection, and recovery for disaster affected populations. So in terms of scope, also, so therefore, the scope is narrower when it comes to humanitarian social work. In terms of the target population, okay, what are we targeting? Let's highlight the targets. In terms of the target population, social work itself works with diverse groups. So the diversity here is key to point out. And so we're talking about children, sorry, the elderly, those who are facing or who have mental and physical challenges, sorry, marginalized communities, sorry, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of the target population as regards to humanitarian social work, so now again there will be a focus, okay? Focus is key here. Let me highlight that. And we're focusing on vulnerable groups in crisis, for example, refugees, internally displaced persons, and survivors of disasters. What about the work environment? Okay, what kind of environment do you work in when you're a generalist social worker, vis-a-vis when you're a specialized humanitarian social worker? So, generally as social workers, you can find work or you'll be working or you have worked in schools, in hospitals, in government agencies, in NGOs, in various stable setting, so many types of organizations. In the work environment in humanitarian social work, you'll be working in conflict zones, in refugee camps, in disaster stricken areas, and humanitarian aid organizations. Let's look at examples. So, in our country, for example, social workers provide counseling and rehabilitation services for street children in Nairobi, while specialized humanitarian social workers assist flood victims in Budalangi and Nyando by providing shelter and food. Regionally, social workers in South Africa address gender based violence and substance abuse. In terms of specialized humanitarian social workers, in Sudan, they provide emergency medical aid in war affected areas. Internationally, for example, in Canada, social workers support immigrant integration and mental health services. Internationally, humanitarian social workers in Ukraine provide psychosocial support for war affected populations. Another difference is the intervention timeline or at the intervention timeline. So, traditional social work would focus on long term sustainable solutions, okay, for individuals and communities, particularly in developmental arena. While uh, in humanitarian social work, in terms of timelines, primarily the timelines are short term interventions with some long term recovery efforts and prevention efforts too. Okay. Differences again according to approach. Traditionally, in traditional social work uses preventive and developmental approaches which promote long term social change, while humanitarian social work is more reactive and crisis oriented because it depends on the occur. of the crisis, okay, like a conflict situation, and providing immediate assistance in emergencies. And we can add that long term, it would be more on prevention, okay, prevention efforts, peace building efforts, for example. In terms of the ethical guidelines, they come across, okay, they cut across because ethics are ethics, but um, in traditional social work, we're talking about ethics being governed by the National Professional Social Work Ethics, for example, the Kenya National Association of Social Workers. Uh, in humanitarian social work, the focus is on humanitarian ethics that we have covered in previous lectures, which include humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. The major organizations that are focused in traditional social work practice include Ministry of Labor and Social Protection in Kenya, and then the African Social Work Network, and internationally within humanitarian social work, we are dealing with particularly international organizations, of course, local organizations. So you have UNHCR, International Red Cross, World Food Program, and MSF. Okay. So what we can conclude here is that uh, there are common values between social work and humanitarian social work, but humanitarian social work focuses on crisis response in disaster and conflict settings. Both of these fields are essential in promoting human dignity and resilience, whether they practice this through long term initiatives or short term initiatives, or through social development or emergency relief efforts. So, humanitarian social work emerges from social work but specializes in assisting individuals, groups, and communities, particularly during crisis situations. Okay, thank you. If there are any follow up issues or questions, please feel free to reach out through the class rep or directly to me. Thank you.